Everyone, and welcome to Custom User Fields, Tags, and your User Groups. I'm Shannon Turner. Let's get started. So first off, we're going to start with what tags and user groups are, what's the difference between them. Then we're going to move on to custom user fields, and then keeping our fields up to date with user updaters. We're going to move on to using this data to personalize your pages and your mailings. And finally, we're going to figure out how we can target our mailings and create reports based on this data. So let's get started. Tags and user groups are two very similar ways of categorizing your users. I like to think of them as movie genres because a movie could be both a comedy and a horror. And every tag and user group should tell one fact about that user. I really like tags because if you change a page's tags, we will retroactively apply those tags to all previous action takers of that page. So in this example, if I have a page with the tag climate change and I add the Green New Deal tag, everyone who has already taken action on that page will also get the tag Green New Deal. However, it's very hard to remove a tag from somebody or to add a tag to someone just as a one-off. And that last point is why we added user groups a few years ago. User groups are very similar to tags, and I think that they're really both great. They both have their place. But user groups also, when you take action on a page, you will get added to that group. But they differ in a couple of very key ways. So unlike tags, we will not apply user groups retroactively if you change the groups on the page. Unlike tags, it's very easy to add a user to a group. It's very easy to remove a user from a group. Best of all, you can add someone to a group or remove them on the user overview screen. Scroll down to groups, and then you can change which ones they have. Super easy. So you can add a user to a group on the user overview screen, as we just saw. You can also get groups by taking action on a page. You can also add a user to a group by import or user updater. We're going to see user updaters in a little bit. And you can also add a user to a group using the API. You can remove users from a group in the exact same ways. So both tags and user groups are very useful. And most organizations use a mix of tags and user groups depending on the situation. It's really about categorizing your users, and I think it's best when you are consistent in using them on your pages. So a lot of ActionKit clients who have been with us for a long time, before user groups were added, they tend to have more tags. Newer clients tend to have more user groups. Either one is just fine. I think they're both useful in different situations. But if you end up wanting to add a user to a group or remove them from a group, you're going to find it a lot easier to use user groups for that than you will for tags. But consistency is probably the most important thing here, because if you're inconsistent with tagging and you're creating reports to analyze the performance of your tagged pages and mailings, you won't really be able to trust those results. You might be missing some key data. So being consistent with your tags and groups will help you be able to rely on that tag or group membership. So I like to say everyone who is in the user group climate change should care about climate change. And if you care about climate change and you don't have that user group, well, you should get that user group, right? So you should make sure that everyone on your list who meets those criteria should have that tag or user group. And a good naming convention can help you stay consistent. So I like to recommend using prefixes for different categories of your tags or groups, because if you group your related tags and groups together, it can be much easier to figure out which ones you have, right? So I've grouped all of my issue tags together, and depending on what issues you have and how specific you get, you might have a lot of very similar tags, right? So for instance, you might have one for climate change, one for environment, one for global warming, one for sea levels. I could go on and on. But using a prefix like issue here helps them keep all of your tags organized and together, especially when you're using type to search. This blog post linked here gives some tips on some ways that you can tag your pages, and it really boils down to using prefixes to help you categorize and have a useful naming scheme for your pages and tags. So here's a bunch of suggestions for different categories of tags that you might find useful and that other clients have also found useful in the past. So for instance, what type of, page is this? What issue or what topic is this about? Who did this go to? What is the target? Was this around a specific, large mass movement? Is this a C3 or a C4 or a pack? Is this a kicker or a reminder? Is this like the start of the campaign? That sort of thing. Who on staff owns this? See, these are just some ideas. And here's another way that you can format these. I think this one looks quite nice. Whatever you use is fine, just be consistent. And I'd really recommend looking backward to create your tags and user groups. Categorize your existing pages instead of creating tags or groups that you might think fit future pages, right? Because you can always create new tags and groups later. Here's one way that you could use tags or groups, right? What types of actions has a user taken? Think about it like a ladder of engagement. Has this user signed a petition? Have they donated? Have they made phone calls? And if you set up your groups or tags in this way, you could try to move your users up the ladder of engagement. For instance, if a user has attended one of your events in the past, you could invite them to host an event next time. That's a higher bar ask, right? It's a much rarer thing to do. So trying to move your users up the ladder of engagement to keep them involved. Here's another good example of how you might use tags. Each tag tells you a single fact about this page and the users who took action on this page. This broad topic here is immigration. You could also add other topics like Palestine, but the type of action it is it's a call page, and so on. Sometimes I see clients combining multiple concepts into a single tag, and I strongly recommend against using tags and user groups in this way. This is not maintainable. Tags and user groups should never be single use, because in this example, you need to remember the precise ordering of topic, and then type, and then moment, and then staff. And if you do this, you're going to end up with thousands of single-use tags, and none of them will be useful for comparison or analysis. If you do need to store long-form source codes like this, that's fine, but a custom field is the correct tool for that job, not a tag. And if you are inconsistent for a while, or if you're getting a late start, don't worry, because you can bulk add or bulk remove tags from your pages. And if you do that, if you change your page's tags, we will retroactively apply those tags to the page's action takers. You can't bulk add or bulk remove user groups with pages, but that's okay because it would be a lot less useful. User groups don't get applied retroactively, so bulk adding those isn't so helpful. Instead, you'd probably want to use an import to add users to a user group. Next up, let's talk custom user fields. The emphasis here really is on custom. Custom user fields are one of the most useful features in ActionKit, but what information is stored there is entirely up to you. Every group is different, every list is different, the information that you care about tends to be different. There's often a lot of overlap, But I think it's important to ask yourself what data is useful to you that helps you connect with and engage your supporters. Creating new fields is much, much easier than you might think. You really just need the name and description and what type of field this is. And notice that I'm leaving a lot of fields blank on this screen. I don't need anything but the name, the description, and the type. Next, I can add this to be collected on my form on the Edit Content screen of my page. Under User Form Fields, I can add this custom user field. You also have a lot of options for ways that you collect this information on your form. Here I have a free-form text box, but you could also do a drop-down menu or a drop-down menu with other options as well. When you're collecting info on your form like this, it's really best for information that the user knows and that you don't. So here's some ideas to get you started for some custom user fields that you could use. Things like, what's your Blue Sky handle? What's your TikTok? What issues are most important to you, and let users choose them from like a list that you provide. What school did you attend? We have a lot of clients asking, like, are you a student? Are you a gun owner? Are you a veteran? Are you in a union? All of that can be really, really helpful. And if this is data that you already have, maybe in another source, you can import it. So here's my spreadsheet, which includes the union and local for these action kitties. Notice in my spreadsheet that the column name starts with user underscore. That's helpful to tell the importer that this is a custom user field. When you're importing custom user fields, you don't have to create them in advance. Here's what the field looks like, whether you create it in advance or you create it or you view it just after your import finishes. And here's some ideas of custom user fields that you could create, which can be really useful to have. Things like how many donations were made in 2024, what was the sum total of donations made in 2024, what was the largest one-time donation, or how many donations have you ever made? Things like, are you an ActBlue Express Lane user? Are you eligible for it? So all of these can be really useful. And you might be wondering why you would add these bits of data to a custom user field when you could use this data in a mailing with a different snippet or with a merge query. Great question, but the answer here is, what if you wanted to reference this user's donations on a donation page? And for that, you would need a custom user field because you can't use a merge query on a page. So here's some ideas of custom user fields that you might already have in another system. These come from the voter file, but I'm sure you can think of some others as well. Here's the voter file ID, so you can link to an external system. Here's the user's birth date. Did they vote in 2024? Did they vote in the midterms? What chapter does the user belong to? What political party? And so on. Next up is user updaters. So when a user fills out their union local on the sign-up form, or if you import it on a spreadsheet, you can update that user's custom user field on a one-time basis. But for fields like, how many donations you made in 2024, or how many donations you've made year to date, keeping that up to date can be a little bit time consuming if you were to do manually. And this is where user updaters come in. Here's a handful of ideas for custom user fields that might be useful to create. And these are also reports that you could create about a user, right? So how many donations did you make in 2024? What was the sum total of those donations? What was the largest donation? And so on. Picture building each of these reports in the query builder. And now let's think of a few others. How many mailings did this user receive in the last 30 days? What was that user's personal open rate in the last 30 days? Now you could write a report for each of these things in ActionKit. That would be really useful. But if you wanted to keep those user fields up to date manually, that would be a huge pain. So this is where user updaters come in. User updaters are really useful because you can write a report in ActionKit to calculate this data, and then you can store the results into one or more custom user fields and then keep those up to date on a schedule. So for example, every day, let's update the personal open rate for every user who's received a mailing in the last 30 days. One thing I want to mention is that none of these names for the custom user fields are magic. I think it's just really helpful to be descriptive. ActionKit does not know what mailing sent 30 is. You and I understand what it is, right? As a name for a custom user field, it probably means like how many mailings a user was sent in the last 30 days. But ActionKit doesn't automatically know this. It's not going to do anything with it on its own. You need to create the field, then create the report, and then create and schedule the user updater. So here's how to get started. First, you're going to create your report, and it's really important to use user ID as your first column. You can have other columns in your report, and these must match custom user fields prefixed with user. For example, user underscore mailings sent 30. You must only include relevant columns in this report, so only the user ID and what fields you want to update. Add the updater report category to your report and save. And this same process works in the exact same way for adding users to groups. So let's walk through this step by step. Here I've created a report. It has the, this short name, this is for user mailing sent in the last 30 days. And I've given it the nice description of how many mailings has this user received in the last 30 days. And I'm, calling it user updater just so it's easy for me to, at a glance, see what it's about. For the query type, this is going to be users. And then two things I want to highlight on this screen that are really important. I like to save the value as a number, not with commas. And this would let me do math on it with a snippet. For instance, is this number greater than 0? And if you check out the video on personalizing mailing content, you'll see some examples of that. The second thing is that my column name needs to match the name of my custom user field prefixed with user underscore. So here it's user underscore mailings sent 30. Next, I add the updater report category. And when you add the updater report category, you'll see this nice help message at the top, which is designed to help guide you through the whole process. And when you save your report, if you haven't yet created your custom user field, you'll be reminded that you should do that. And it even links to the page where you can create your custom fields. So that link will go here to create the field. This link will go to create your user updater. So if I click the very helpfully placed link, I can then add my new custom user field. Here I'm calling it mailings sent 30. Notice that this needs to match the column name referenced in the report. So these are the final steps for our user updater. We have to run a report and confirm the results look correct. After the results look good, let's create that custom user field if we haven't already. And again, we'll get that reminder to create the field if we haven't. You'll need to create your user updater and then run the user updater manually or on a schedule. So here I'm running my report and getting the results. I can look at the user mailing history screen for these users to make sure that these results make sense. And it's a good idea to take note of some of these user IDs so that we can double check the results and make sure that they look right. You can create a new user updater from the Reports tab. Go to User Updaters on the right-hand side or on the Users tab. We give you two places to do it. Either way is fine. And next, click Add User Updater. And even if you, aren't, forget this, video presentation, all of the documentation up here, these links are super helpful. So this can be a really great way to, get a refresher if you haven't made a user updater in a while. So let's give this a useful name, a useful description, and choose a staff member who's going to be notified on success or failure, and then choose which report you want to use. And if you don't see the report here, either you forgot to add the updater report category, or maybe you're already using this report for a user updater. Each user updater can only use a report once. Next, you can set this up to run on a schedule or just run it once manually. So for instance, if I were doing all of the year-to-date donations in 2024, I don't need to run it, on a schedule because it's in the past. Those numbers aren't going to change. I can just run it once. But if it's something like mailing sent in the last 30 days, then I probably want to run it on a daily schedule. So earlier I said we'd want to remember these results so that we can confirm that everything works as expected. So let's do that now. So here I have not run this user updater yet. Let's take a look at the first user here, user ID 16. We go over to the users tab. Let's go to the user overview screen, scroll all the way down, and then over to the mailing history screen. When I made these slides, here was the mailing history for this user. And then if we go back over to the user overview screen, scroll to the bottom, here we see that they have no custom user field just yet. That's expected because we haven't yet run this user updater. So now let's set it up on a schedule. Let's run it. We can see that it's running now, thanks to these helpful banners up top. And then if we open the user updater screen again, we can see that it completed already, which is great. We can see how many users were updated and which columns got updated as well. If we go back to our user overview screen, we can see that it added the custom user field for this user, and it put the same value in that we saw in our report. So user updaters work the same way with groups. The only difference is you can use the group or group ID column, not both, either one. If you choose the group column, then this has to be the group's name. If you choose group ID, then it has to be the group's ID. And you can also remove users from groups with a user updater using the group remove or group ID remove column. If you find that you're removing users and adding users to and from groups frequently, you might find that it's easier to use a custom user field for that instead. So to quickly recap, you can update a user's custom user fields based on the results of a report that you create, and then keep that data up to date on a schedule. This is really helpful when calculating this data. It would take a really long time. So for instance, if you're getting the personal open rates of all of your users, but you want the data available on demand, this can also be really useful when you want the data available to personalize your pages and your mailings, which we'll see next. So now we're going to take a look at some examples of how you can personalize your mailings and pages with user data. And if you want more, make sure you check out the personalizing mailing content training, which I'll link in the description. So here I have a snippet for, is this user tagged with the volunteer? Does this user have this tag, in other words? So if a user is tagged with volunteer, let's say they signed up on one of your volunteer pages, or you imported them to add that tag to them, you can personalize the content to show them. So if a user is tagged with volunteer, say, hey, thanks for being a volunteer. Otherwise, ask, would you like to sign up to volunteer? And it works the same way with user groups. So let's say, for instance, you have the user group volunteers, and all of your users are added to that group based on whether or not they've volunteered. You can say, if user is in the group volunteers, then thank you for being a volunteer. Otherwise, would you like to sign up to volunteer? Here's the link. You can also reference a user's custom user fields in your personalization. So in this first example, if you know somebody's in a union, you can ask them to share the petition with other members of their union. Otherwise, you can ask them to send the petition to their friends. So here's a trick that I use all the time to preview a page and see what it would look like for a specific user. First, I will go to the user overview screen for one of my test users and copy their AK ID. Then I'll go into one of my petition pages and I'll append question mark AK ID equal sign to the end of the page's URL and then paste that AK ID that I copied on the previous slide. Once I've done that, this page is now going to be personalized to my content. It's exactly what my user would see. So just to recap, user tagged, user in group, and user custom fields all work with your mailings and your pages, which give you a ton of different ways that you can customize your content, especially with conditional content based on whether a user has a tag or is in a group or has a certain value for a custom field. I really like to use the AK ID trick in the URL to confirm that it works for your page and shows the exact content that you expect for each specific user. And if you want more, make sure you check out the training on personalizing mailing content. So now we are going to take a look at how to target our mailings and create reports based on the results of all of this, tags and user groups and custom user fields that we've seen. So first, you can send your mailing to your users that you know care about immigration. And knowing what topics a user cares about is one of the best ways to improve your action rates because you can send them the petitions and the actions that they are most interested in. So here I'm including in my email all users who have taken action on a page that has the topic of immigration. You can also target based on user groups in this same way. So in this example, maybe I have a high bar action that I want someone to take. And so I'm going to ask my existing volunteers. You can even get super specific down to the specific value that a user has for a custom user field. And this is not just for mailings either. You can do data analysis on your users in the exact same way. So here's a report that will give me every user who's in the volunteers user group, who's also clicked on the mailing in the last X days. So I'm starting off with the user's query type. I have a nice name, short name, and description for my report. Here I'm getting the user ID so that I can target a mailing with it. Here I'm choosing the date of the last mailing that was clicked is in the last blank days, and they have to be in the volunteers user group. Next, I'm going to add the mailer report category. So this will let me target my mailings by the results of this report. And now, when I go to the targeting screen of my mailing, I go to the query library targeting option, and now I can target my mailing to any volunteers who have clicked in the last 60 days. So that's all for this presentation. Thank you all so much. And if you want to see the other presentations from ClientCon 2025, they're going to be at this link, and I'll also include lots of links in the description. Thanks so much.